The essential part of establishing trust between the human and the machine is having a machine which probably, first of all, does a good job of understanding what the human is looking for, and secondly, gives a consistent and clear response, because I think people are probably looking, because they know it's a computer, and they're looking for something a bit more reliable, a bit more robust than a person that could be maybe sometimes get things wrong or maybe isn't too sure. No uncertainty, I think, probably, so that you know that you're going to get something useful out of the machine. Whether the machine needs to be like a human or whether it needs to be like a machine, I think there's different opinions on that. I certainly started off thinking that it needs to be like a human, and certainly there's this idea of the Turing test where the machine passes for a human. But I think I've coming to the conclusion that maybe that's not too necessary. Some of our implementations where the machine isn't trying to be a human, sometimes they can come across as slightly robotic, but it seems that people don't get offended by that because they know it's a machine and their expectations are that it may be slightly robotic, and so it doesn't surprise them at all. They seem to feel comfortable with that idea. I think it's an interesting question whether we need to have a machine that is clearly a digital worker or is more like a human. My sense is that it probably depends a bit on the scenario. It might be that you have different personalities in different situations, depending on how critical, time sensitive the question is. The machine may take on slightly different personalities or different environments. So I can imagine different personalities for different kind of businesses. I think the machine probably has a fixed personality. I think the machine can adapt to the situation. So one of the things that we're just playing with right now is the ability to pick up on the emotion in a question that's coming in. So if I said to the machine, I'm really angry with you because you're not answering my question, then the machine can detect that anger and therefore perhaps provide a different kind of response because it detects that I'm angry. But the response probably always fits within a certain personality, so it shouldn't suddenly become a completely different person because I've expressed anger, but it may take different actions. Specifically in that situation, its action might be to hand me across to a human, because it knows its limitations are being reached and that I'm angry with it. So rather than try and resolve it, it might just say, hey, human, please help me. So we can pick up on quite subtle nuances, how people express themselves. So you don't have to say, I am angry, for us to detect anger. The detection of anger can come from all sorts of different words. We can pick up on sentiment as well. So typically these things are with a percentage confidence. The technology to detect emotion and sentiment, etc., is absolutely production ready. What is just being explored is how that is applied. So I think we have the technology, but how businesses choose to use that and the scenarios and the behaviours that get expressed as a result are just being explored right now. I see the machines as augmenting humans. So in some situations, that might mean that we replace some humans, but in a lot of the situations we work in, we see that there's more demand than the business can satisfy at the high end of complexity. And so really what's happening is we're displacing the areas where the humans don't add a lot of value, quite robotic exercises, and displacing those humans into the higher value areas. I'd say there's a relatively small number of quite ambitious projects using this kind of technology for ourselves in Watson. The most famous would be the work we've done around oncology, where we're training a computer system to assist doctors in the diagnosis and treatment of cancer. And that's quite a serious area where there's a lot of work that needs to go in, because obviously you're dealing with people's lives and healthcare, and you need to be pretty confident about how the system behaves. And also because the people using the system are experts themselves. So a dumb system is of no use to them. They need a really sophisticated answer. But those things absolutely exist, and the market is split between a larger number of straightforward implementations and a smaller number of very large, sophisticated things which are reshaping industries and reshaping businesses, and in healthcare, changing people's lives. In finance, there is some early examples of the sophisticated implementation of the AI technology. People, I think, are very interested around the area of sort of wealth management, advice giving, typically very complex areas, a lot of very complex rules. The humans need to be very carefully trained. The opportunity around areas like wealth management is where there's a large number of people who have enough money to warrant having advice, but they don't have enough money to be willing to pay for the type of advice that they probably need. And because regulation has changed and now advice can't be given on a commission basis, you have to actually pay for it up front. Unless you have a lot of money, you don't have enough money to pay for the advice. And therefore there's essentially this sort of set of people in the middle who are getting no advice because they can't afford to pay for it, and they're just making it up themselves. And that's where I think the opportunity for automation comes in, because the computer can be trained essentially to give the advice, and therefore we don't have the costs of the humans when we're giving that advice. I think the real opportunity is around scaling. It's not around the very high end, because in the high end, the humans always add a little bit of extra value, and if you're in the high end, there's enough money to pay for the humans. The opportunity for automation is in the middle section, where you want better advice, you want more sophisticated answers that take advantage of broader sets of data, and there isn't typically enough funding to have the humans to do all of that stuff. And that's where the machine can take over. I think it does matter if they know if it's a human or a machine, because I think it sets the expectations. If you don't know, then your expectation is probably that it's a human, and therefore that it will give human-like responses and human-like capabilities. If you know it's a machine, your expectations will be slightly different. And that changes how you configure, how you train the system. It changes everything, really. I think you have to develop the trust in flight with the machine. I think one of the things I notice is whenever we build a Watson system and you give it to somebody to play with, the first thing they do is they ask it silly questions and they play around with it. And that sounds trivial, but actually I think that's part of establishing trust. It's trying to suss out, how does this machine behave, what does it do, what can it not do, where are its limitations. And I think that's a natural human behaviour. And if you looked at when Siri was first launched, Apple put in some clever quips for kind of daft questions like, what's the meaning of life? And the internet was full of people putting clips of what Siri was saying in response to these daft questions. But it was all part of our human response of trying to work out where the barriers were, where its capabilities ended, and just trying to suss out what this thing was. So I think that's a really important aspect. I think the idea of the creepy line is really important, and if you build a machine that ends up knowing things that it's not obvious to the user that the machine would know those things, but the machine does know those things. Like you build a Watson-powered app on a phone, and it can work out the geolocation of where you are, and therefore subtly uses that in the conversation. It's not obvious to the user that the machine knows where you are, but it does. And I think that brings all sorts of questions around privacy and concerns, and people often say it crosses the creepy line when that happens, and that I don't think there's any clear definition of where that creepy line is, but we all know where it is when we've crossed it. I think that we need to be very clear with the users of the machine what's going on. Much like you might have a privacy statement in an app or something, I think we're going to need privacy statements in AIs, right? You are using this AI, and be aware that it knows these things about you, and this is how it knows about those things. And I think if you're upfront about that, and maybe even at some stage we'll give users the options to say, I'm not comfortable with this AI looking up my bank balance or something, but I'm okay with the AI being able to answer questions about how do I find the nearest branch, right? And to actually be in control of the situation if you give them the privacy controls. Much like on your phone, you can turn off the geolocation if you don't like the idea of the phone knowing where you are. Maybe we'll do the same in AIs. The most obvious application of the technology is around customer service environments where clients of the organisation have questions. If it's a retailer, you maybe you've ordered something and it's faulty and you want to know how to return it. Straightforward, I've got an issue, I would normally phone a call centre, I would normally talk to somebody, but I don't really need the complexity of that interaction. I just need a very simple answer to what's the address I should send this book back to. And then as we cover off the simpler implementations, the technology is obviously maturing all of the time, and the ability to then interact in a more complicated scenario is going to naturally occur over the next couple of years. But I would definitely start with those kind of simple, straightforward, I've got a problem, how do I do this kind of areas, and expand out as the capabilities improve. I think there's a common misapprehension that when we talk about teaching systems, that we're teaching systems both how to understand the question a user is asking and how to provide an answer. In reality, most of the time today, that we're teaching the system how to understand the user's question. Once we've understood the user's question, today, most of the time, we are providing a fixed answer to that question. So we're not dynamically discovering different answers. And therefore, if you ask me a set of questions, I might adapt my behaviour based on the conversation, and then if you ask me the same question tomorrow, I may give a different answer because I've learned a bit more and changed a bit more my behaviour. That's not how most systems are working today. We're teaching the system how to understand the question, but not how to understand the answer. The technology is coming to be able to teach a system how to provide an answer. If you just look at what Google have done with AlphaGo, right, beating Go, that wasn't the achievement wasn't so much beating the human player at Go. The achievement was that the machine learned how to play Go. So the technology is there, but it's still very much in the kind of research, special purpose kind of area right now. But in the next few years, that will filter back down into product and into realistic implementations at scale. But today, I would say it's much more in the research end of things.